Yes, now I'm a Christian. I converted myself from Islam to Christianity. My name is Amira Hassan. I'm 32 years old and I work as a pediatric nurse in Chicago. 10 years ago, I left my home in Jordan to pursue my graduate studies in the United States. I came from a devout Muslim family where faith was the center of our lives. My father taught Islamic studies at a local university, and my mother led women's Quran study groups in our community. Growing up, I prayed 5 times a day, observed Ramadan faithfully, and wore my hijab with pride and devotion. I never questioned my faith, not once. Islam was my identity, my moral compass, my entire worldview. Even in America, I remained devoted, continuing my prayers and practices just as I had in Jordan. As a pediatric nurse, I found purpose in caring for sick children. I believed Allah had placed me there to be an instrument of His compassion. My morning prayers centered me, preparing me for each day's challenges. At the hospital, my colleague Sophia, a Catholic nurse, often asked about my faith. "I admire your dedication," she once told me. Little did either of us know that true faith isn't about integration, but transformation, and my transformation was yet to come. My brother Khalid's pride meant everything to me. During our last call before the accident, he mentioned our cousin Fatima had stopped wearing her hijab in London. "The West changes people," he said disapprovingly. "It makes them forget who they are." "That won't happen to me," I promised. "I know who I am." That was my life before March 15th, 2023, before everything changed. That night, I left the hospital at 11 p.m. during a severe winter storm. I was exhausted after losing a 7-year-old leukemia patient named Eli. His mother had whispered prayers in Hebrew as I recited mine in Arabic, different words, same desperate hope. As I walked to my car, I called Sophia. "I'll be fine. I just need to get home and pray." Those were the last words I spoke before the accident. Wearied by Eli's loss, I pulled out of the garage into sheets of rain, the storm's fury a mirror to the ache in my chest. I turned on the radio, fumbling for something, music, news, anything, to drown out the echoes of his mother's Hebrew prayers mingling with my Arabic ones. The windshield wipers battled the downpour, slashing brief windows of clarity before the glass blurred again. I glanced at the dashboard, 11:17 p.m., calculating how many hours of sleep I might get before my next shift, then realized I should call my parents soon. It had been several days since our last conversation. Then, a flash of headlights. The sudden realization of something massive coming toward me. The instinctive jerk of the steering wheel. The air shattered with metal grinding into metal. Later, I would learn what happened from police reports and witness statements. A delivery truck skidded on black ice, crossed the center line, and collided with my car head-on. The impact was catastrophic. First responders had to use the jaws of life to extract me from the wreckage. By the time the ambulance arrived at the trauma center, ironically the same hospital where I worked, my vitals were crashing. I suffered a ruptured spleen, collapsed lung, and severe internal bleeding. During emergency surgery, my heart stopped beating for approximately 3 minutes. The medical record would later state, "Patient experienced cardiac arrest during procedure. Resuscitation efforts were successful after 3 minutes, 12 seconds." But what happened during those 3 minutes changed me forever. The first sensation I remember was the sudden absence of pain. One moment I was nowhere, in the blank darkness of unconsciousness, and the next I was floating near the ceiling of the operating room, looking down at my own body on the table. A team of doctors and nurses worked frantically below me, their voices oddly muted as if I was hearing them through water. "We're losing her!" a surgeon shouted, his gloved hands red with my blood. I recognized him, Dr. Patel from General Surgery. I had just spoken with him in the cafeteria the day before. I felt strangely detached, watching the scene with curious objectivity. That was my body, but somehow I was no longer confined to it. I wasn't afraid. Instead, I felt a profound sense of peace and liberation. The operating room was a flurry of activity. I could see familiar faces, colleagues I worked with daily, now fighting to save my life. Dr. Patel barked orders as nurses moved with practiced efficiency. Someone monitored my vital signs, calling out numbers that grew increasingly concerning. I watched as they prepared the defibrillator, the machine charging with a high-pitched whine. "Clear!" Someone pressed defibrillator paddles to my chest. My body arched, then fell back limply onto the table. The monitor continued its ominous monotone beep. They tried again, and again. I felt no connection to the drama unfolding below. The fear and urgency that permeated the room didn't reach me. I wanted to tell them not to worry, that I was fine, better than fine. But before I could make sense of what was happening, I felt a gentle tug, pulling me away from the operating room. The hospital walls dissolved around me, and I found myself drawn into what I can only describe as a tunnel of light. Not a harsh, blinding light, but a living, pulsating luminescence that seemed to embrace me. The light wasn't just something I could see. I could feel it passing through me, warming places inside that I never knew were cold. The tunnel seemed to stretch infinitely before me, yet I moved through it rapidly, without effort. There was no sensation of walking or flying, just being and becoming. Physical laws no longer applied. I was beyond the realm where they held meaning. The light surrounding me carried information, emotional, spiritual, intellectual. It communicated directly to my consciousness in a language beyond words. I understood things that had puzzled me throughout my life. Questions that had no answers suddenly didn't need them. As I moved through this tunnel, I became aware that I wasn't alone. Presences surrounded me, guiding me forward. They didn't have distinct physical forms, yet I recognized them somehow. One presence in particular felt achingly familiar, a signature of energy that my soul remembered. "Teta?" I called out, using the Arabic word for grandmother. "Is that you?" She didn't answer with words, but I felt her joy washing over me. My grandmother, who had passed away when I was 10 years old, was somehow with me. I could sense her love, her unmistakable essence. Not as the frail woman who had died after a long battle with cancer, but as a vibrant, radiant being of pure energy. I remembered sitting by her bedside as a child, watching her pray despite her pain, her fingers moving weakly over her prayer beads. "Allah sees our suffering," she had told me. "He counts every tear." In that moment, suspended between worlds, I understood what she meant in ways I never could have as a child. Other presences surrounded me too, relatives I'd known in life and some I hadn't. An uncle who died before I was born, a cousin lost to childhood leukemia. They communicated without speaking, their thoughts flowing into mine like tributaries into a river. "We've been waiting for you," they seemed to say, "but it's not your time yet." There was no sense of sadness in this communication, no disappointment that I wouldn't be staying. Just a perfect acceptance of what was meant to be. I felt embraced by a cosmic order that made perfect sense, though I couldn't articulate how. As the presences faded, the tunnel widened into a vast expanse that defies earthly description. Imagine the most beautiful landscape you've ever seen, then remove the limitations of physical matter. Colors existed that I'd never seen before, hues that don't appear on any earthly spectrum. The air, if it was air, felt thick with love and knowledge. In the distance, 4 crystal doorways arranged in a semicircle beckoned. Each shimmered with different colors and energies, each humming with its own particular frequency. As I approached, I could somehow see through them, each revealing different possible futures, different paths my life could take if I returned. I moved closer, drawn by curiosity and something deeper, a soul-level recognition. In the first doorway, I saw myself continuing as a nurse but specializing in palliative care. I was sitting beside an elderly patient, holding her hand as she took her final breaths. I could feel the compassion emanating from my future self, the deep understanding of death as a transition rather than an ending. In the second doorway, I had become an advocate for interfaith dialogue. I stood at a podium addressing a diverse audience. My hijab was gone, but I wore a pendant that combined Islamic and Christian symbols. The faces watching me reflected curiosity, openness, occasional skepticism. But I spoke with a conviction that came from first-hand experience. In the third doorway, I was surrounded by children, my own children, teaching them to pray in a way I couldn't quite recognize. Not the Islamic prayers of my childhood, but something different, something that honored Jesus specifically. My husband stood nearby, his expression loving and supportive. This future radiated domestic joy and spiritual certainty. In the fourth doorway, I was in a hospital, not as a nurse, but as a patient. I was thin, clearly ill, but there was a luminous quality to my face. Sophia sat beside my bed, reading aloud from a book I couldn't identify. This future was shorter, but somehow no less valuable, filled with meaning despite its brevity. Before I could examine the doorways further, a presence approached that made all others seem like candles beside the sun. The light emanating from this being was so intense that in any physical realm, it would have been unbearable to behold. Yet here, it felt like finally seeing clearly after a lifetime of dim vision. I didn't immediately recognize who stood before me. In my earthly understanding, I expected Allah as I had imagined Him, majestic, distant, awesome in power. But this being radiated something I had never associated with the divine: vulnerability, love without condition, closeness without judgment. No words were exchanged, but in an instant I received a lifetime of communication. I understood that I was being shown my soul signature, a unique harmonic frequency that identified me in the spiritual realm. It sounded like music beyond anything earthly instruments could produce, yet I recognized it as fundamentally me, the truest expression of my essence. This signature wasn't just sound, it was also color, texture, emotion, thought, and something else entirely for which human language has no term. I understood that everyone has such a signature, a spiritual DNA that persists beyond physical death, unchangeable and eternal. Then, with gentle intentionality, the radiant being revealed his identity to me. I felt rather than see the wounds in his hands, and suddenly I knew. This was Jesus, Isa as we called him in Islam, but not as a prophet among prophets. Here, he revealed himself as something more. In Islam, we revere Jesus as a great prophet, born of the Virgin Mary, a performer of miracles, a righteous messenger. But we do not see him as divine, do not recognize him as the Son of God. This understanding had been central to my faith, unquestioned throughout my life. My confusion must have been apparent because the next communication I received was, "I am all that you have sought. The truth you've been worshipping all along." This revelation should have shocked me, even angered me. My entire life had been built around Islamic teachings. But in this state, free from bodily constraints and cultural conditioning, I could only perceive truth. And the truth standing before me was love personified. Jesus showed me my life, not as a linear progression of events, but as a tapestry where every moment existed simultaneously. I saw my childhood prayers in Jordan, the earnest devotion of a little girl who loved Allah with her whole heart. I saw my teenage years, the strengthening of my identity as a Muslim woman. the pride with which I wore my hijab. I saw my decision to study nursing, driven by a desire to be of service, to ease suffering as an expression of faith. He showed me moments I had forgotten, kindnesses I had extended to others, times I had stood up for what was right despite fear, instances where my compassion had made a difference. But he also showed me my failures, moments of judgment, of spiritual pride, of fear disguised as righteousness. Your path was always leading to me, I understood him to say, though you walked it calling me by different names. This wasn't a repudiation of my Muslim faith, but rather a fulfillment of it, as if I had been climbing a mountain from one side, never knowing that all paths eventually converged at the summit. Then came one of the most startling revelations. I was shown that my physical body had once contained a twin that had been absorbed early in my mother's pregnancy, a vanishing twin syndrome my parents never knew about. This spiritual twin had remained in the afterlife as my guide and connection to the divine realm. During pivotal moments in my life, when I felt particularly inspired or protected, it had been this twin soul watching over me. I was shown images of this twin, not as a fully formed human being, but as a spiritual entity with whom I shared a profound connection. We had been one briefly in the physical realm, and though only I had continued in bodily form, our souls remained intertwined across dimensions. You have never been alone, Jesus conveyed. The whispers you've heard in your deepest prayers were real. Those moments of clarity during prayer, when answers seemed to come from beyond myself, they hadn't been imagined. They were communion with this sibling soul, this other self, who existed in proximity to the divine. Time operated differently in this realm. What felt like months of communion and revelation was mere seconds in the physical world. I was shown future events, my brother Khalid facing a health crisis in the coming year, my friend Sophia experiencing a profound spiritual awakening of her own. My parents struggled to understand the changes that would come over me if I returned. I saw Khalid doubled over in pain, rushing to a hospital emergency room. I saw the doctors initially misdiagnosing him, saw the infection spreading before a second doctor recognized the severity of the situation. I saw him in recovery, pale but alive, whispering something that would later prove significant. I saw Sophia kneeling in prayer in an empty church, tears streaming down her face. I felt her spiritual breakthrough, a moment of surrender after years of dutiful but somewhat distant religious practice. I understood that our paths were meant to intertwine, that my experience would be a catalyst for her own. I saw my parents receiving news of my accident, the fear on their faces as they booked emergency flights to America. I saw their relief upon learning I would survive, followed by confusion and concern as I began to speak of my experience. I felt their struggle between unconditional love for their daughter and deep commitment to their religious beliefs. Most significantly, I was shown 12 strangers whose lives would intersect with mine if I chose to return. People from different faiths and backgrounds who would be affected by my story in ways I couldn't fully comprehend. A teenage girl questioning her faith tradition. A doctor facing a crisis of meaning. A grieving father searching for hope. An interfaith leader building bridges between communities. A seminary student wrestling with doubts. A woman facing terminal illness with fear. A child with an innate spiritual sensitivity. A religious leader defending rigid doctrines. A journalist investigating near-death accounts. A scientist seeking evidence of consciousness beyond the brain. A lonely elder at the end of life. A former believer bitter about religious hypocrisy. I understood that if I returned, my story would touch each of these lives at critical moments, sometimes through direct interaction, sometimes through others who had heard my testimony. the ripple effects would extend far beyond what I could see or know. Then came the moment of choice. Unlike the simple stay or return scenario I might have expected, I was presented with a geometric light puzzle that seemed to reflect my deepest values and beliefs. The puzzle had no single solution. Each configuration led to a different doorway among the four. The puzzle appeared as interconnected shapes of light: triangles, circles, squares, and forms that had no earthly equivalent. They rotated and shifted in response to my thoughts and intentions. Each movement created harmonies or dissonances with my soul signature, revealing the alignment between different possible futures and my true nature. "The choice is yours," Jesus conveyed, "but know that each choice ripples outward, touching countless others." I understood then that I wasn't just deciding whether to live or die. I was choosing which life to return to, and whether to return with or without the memory of this experience. Some doorways showed me returning with full recall of this encounter. Others showed me awakening with only a vague sense of having experienced something profound, but unable to articulate what. This was a level of agency I had never considered in my earthly understanding of fate and divine will. In Islam, we believe that Allah has knowledge of all things, that our destinies are written, yet we maintain free will within that knowledge. Here, I was experiencing the reality of that paradox, genuine choice within a larger pattern of divine meaning. As I contemplated each possibility, the being of light embraced me with such overwhelming love that I wept without tears. In that embrace, I understood something that my earthly mind had never grasped: that the divine love I had sought all my life was not conditional on perfect obedience or ritual devotion. It simply was, constant, unwavering, and freely given. With that understanding came clarity. I knew which door to choose. I moved toward the third doorway, the one that showed me surrounded by children, teaching them a new way to pray. As I approached it, the puzzle pieces aligned themselves, forming a pattern I somehow recognized as true. Just before stepping through, I turned back toward Jesus. "Will I remember you?" I asked without words. His response flowed into me. "You will remember what you need when you need it. I am never far from you." With that promise, I stepped through the doorway and crashed back into excruciating pain. "We have a rhythm," I heard someone shout. "BP's coming back up." The harsh lights of the operating room blinded me. The peaceful weightlessness was gone, replaced by the leaden heaviness of my damaged body. Every nerve ending screamed in agony. That was the last thing I remembered before slipping into a coma that would last for 2 weeks. My body felt like a prison after the freedom I had experienced. For days, I drifted between sedated sleep and painful waking, struggling to reconcile what had happened to me. At first, I told myself it had been a dream, a hallucination caused by trauma and medication. But the details remained vivid, refusing to fade like dreams do. And there were things I couldn't explain, like knowing about a new intern who had joined the trauma team while I was unconscious, or being able to describe conversations that had occurred in my room while I was in the coma. Dr. Mitchell was the first to notice these anomalies. He had come to check on me, surprised to find a colleague as his patient. When I mentioned something about his new research project, information shared during a conversation at my bedside while I was deeply unconscious, he froze. "Amira, how could you possibly know about that?" he asked, his scientific mind clearly troubled. I had no rational explanation to offer him, but there were other inexplicable things as well. I knew that the delivery truck driver who had hit me, a man named Marcus Williams, had survived with minor injuries and was tormented by guilt. I knew that my apartment plants had died because no one had watered them. I knew that my mother had placed a small Quran by my hospital bed during her first visit. These weren't lucky guesses. They were facts I couldn't have known through normal means, details confirmed by others who were startled by my knowledge. Sophia was the first person I told about my experience. As a fellow nurse, I expected skepticism, perhaps a gentle explanation about oxygen deprivation and its effects on the brain. Instead, she sat quietly, holding my hand as tears streamed down her face. "I believe you," she whispered, "and I'm here for whatever comes next." She brought me books about near-death experiences, accounts from people across cultures and time periods who described journeys similar to mine. I was stunned by the commonalities: the tunnel of light, the life review, the encounter with deceased loved ones, the sense of unconditional love. How could so many people, separated by language, culture, and religious background, report such similar experiences? What came next was the hardest part of my journey. As my body slowly healed, multiple surgeries, physical therapy, the long process of recovery, my spirit entered a period of profound crisis. Everything I had believed about God, about death, about salvation, was called into question. The faith that had been my anchor now felt insufficient to explain what I had experienced. I had encountered Jesus not as the prophet described in the Quran, but as something more, a divine presence, the embodiment of love itself. How could I reconcile this with the teachings I had followed my entire life? I invited Imam Farooq from my mosque to visit me in the hospital. He listened patiently as I shared parts of my experience, careful to omit anything that might seem blasphemous. When I was strong enough, I attempted salat beside him, but the familiar motions and Arabic phrases felt hollow, no longer reaching their intended destination. "Allah tests those He loves," he said, patting my hand. "These visions come from your medication and trauma. Return to your prayers and community, and you'll find peace again." His words, meant to comfort, felt like a dismissal of something profoundly real. Later, I met Father Thomas, the hospital chaplain. Unlike the Imam, he didn't explain away my experience. He listened, asking questions that helped me articulate my struggle. "Many saints and mystics have reported similar encounters," he said. "The divine often breaks through in ways that transcend our religious categories." He shared stories of Muslim Sufis who'd felt divine love beyond orthodox bounds, and Christian contemplatives whose visions echoed mine, introducing me to the idea that a deeper truth might unite all faiths. These conversations gave me space to explore without rejecting my past or my new understanding. After 6 weeks in the hospital, I returned to an apartment that no longer felt like home. My prayer rug remained untouched. The God I had addressed as Allah now had a face I'd encountered personally. Dreams began a week later, Jesus appearing by the Sea of Galilee or leading me through ancient Jerusalem. I shared these only with Sophia and Father Thomas, fearing others would see me as a traitor. Yet I didn't feel I was betraying Islam but following it to fulfillment. The Quran honors Jesus and his miracles. Perhaps the differences between faiths were more about human interpretation than divine intention. I began attending both mosque and church, finding elements of truth in each, though neither fully understood my experience, a journey now unfolding beyond the confines of any single tradition. 4 months after my accident, my brother Khalid flew from Jordan to check on me. He had been worried about my vague responses to family video calls, my evasiveness when asked about attending mosque. The moment he walked into my apartment, his eyes went to my bare head, no hijab, and then to the small wooden cross that Sophia had given me, now sitting on my bookshelf. "What is happening to you, Amira?" he asked, his voice a mixture of concern and accusation. I told him everything then. The complete account of my near-death experience, the dreams, my ongoing spiritual transformation. He listened in stunned silence, occasionally shaking his head. "You know how this sounds," he said when I finished. like you've been brainwashed by Western ideas, by these Christians you've been spending time with. I haven't been influenced by anyone, Khalid, I replied. If anything, I've been trying to suppress this to make it fit into our family's beliefs. But I can't deny what I experienced. People hallucinate under trauma, he argued. It's documented medically. Your brain was deprived of oxygen. We went back and forth like this for hours. I understood his position. It was the same rational explanation I had initially sought for myself. But rationality couldn't account for everything I now knew. Do you have any idea what this would do to our parents? He finally said. To hear that their daughter believes she saw Isa as God? They would think you've been brainwashed by Americans. I haven't been brainwashed, I replied quietly. If anything, I've been unbrainwashed. I've seen beyond the boundaries we place around faith. Khalid stayed for 3 days. Our conversations were difficult, sometimes heated, but ultimately loving. Before leaving, he made me promise one thing: to wait before making any public declarations about my faith, to give myself time to fully heal, to be absolutely certain. Whatever you decide, he said, hugging me tightly at the airport, you're my sister. Nothing changes that. I kept my promise to Khalid, exploring my new understanding through interfaith discussions and meetings with both Imam Farouk and Father Thomas. When I returned to work, my experience had transformed my approach to patients. I no longer feared death and could comfort grieving families with authentic certainty. Dr. Mitchell noticed the change. You're different since the accident, he observed. There's a peace about you, even when things are chaotic. 8 months later, Khalid suffered life-threatening appendicitis. At his hospital bedside in Jordan, he squeezed my hand and whispered, I saw him too. Whether delirium or genuine spiritual experience, that moment bridged our divide. My parents were less accepting. My mother wept when I shared my experience, while my father's face hardened with disappointment and concern. We did not raise you to abandon your faith, he said finally, to turn your back on the Ummah, on the teachings of the Prophet, peace be upon him. I haven't abandoned faith, I tried to explain. I've found its fulfillment. But such words sounded like betrayal to them. We parted with an uneasy truce. They wouldn't disown me, but neither would they accept what they saw as my conversion to another religion. As for the 12 strangers whose lives would intersect with mine, I've met a few, like a Muslim teenager questioning her faith after her brother's suicide. I held her as she cried, sharing my story, her tears softening into hope. A grieving atheist father, whose son I'd nursed, found solace in my certainty of love beyond death, his anger giving way to quiet wonder. Others await, I feel, their paths woven into mine by threads of grace I cannot yet trace. Each conversation has been a revelation, a confirmation that my experience wasn't meant to remain private, that the understanding I was given of divine love transcending religious boundaries was meant to be shared with those who needed to hear it. In the hospital cafeteria one afternoon, I overheard a young Muslim medical student arguing with a Christian colleague about theological differences. The conversation was growing heated, each defending their tradition's exclusive claim to truth. Excuse me, I said, joining their table. What if both of your traditions contain truth, just seen from different perspectives? They looked at me skeptically, but something in my expression must have communicated authenticity. For the next hour, I shared parts of my experience, careful not to claim certainty about things beyond my understanding, but offering my testimony as a bridge between their positions. By the end of our conversation, their argumentative tone had softened. The Christian student admitted how little he knew about Islamic teachings on Jesus. The Muslim student acknowledged the beauty in many Christian concepts. They didn't leave in perfect agreement, but they left with expanded perspectives, another ripple effect of my journey. 1 year after my accident, I made the decision to be baptized. It wasn't a rejection of my Muslim upbringing, but rather a public affirmation of the new understanding I had been given. My parents didn't attend the ceremony, but they didn't disown me either, a testament to love transcending religious differences. I still honor many Islamic traditions and the beauty I found in my upbringing. My journey continues to unfold day by day as I share my story with those who need to hear it. The boundaries we place between faiths often say more about human limitations than divine reality. And if there's one truth I learned during those 3 minutes and 12 seconds, it's this. Love is the foundation of all existence, and it awaits each of us beyond the veil of this life.